Good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time this afternoon to come over to the auditorium. We're having this meeting because there are some questions about some of our ministries and some rumors that are going around that aren't exactly true. So we just thought we would give you some information about our ministries. So that's why we're having the meeting today. And people that don't live at Carondelet Village feel like they aren't getting the same information, so we invited them if they wanted to come also. It's on channel 992, and it's also being recorded. So if you know of someone who didn't see it, then you can let us know. And we're going to put the link on Rapid Relay. That's not this. All right, we're going to start with prayer. So if we just can take a moment to remember that we are in God's presence. God of great love, we commit ourselves to living in the most sincere, true, and profound humility so that we might give voice to your gospel of peace. Empower us with your grace of union and reconciliation, so that we might be impelled to give our whole lives for those deprived of bread, peace, and love. Allow us the courage to give voice to the cries of the poor, to the terror of those at war, to the humiliation of the many who are disenfranchised. May your healing and unifying love flow through us in such a way that it honors every neighbor on earth without distinction, in a manner that glorifies you as the creator, redeemer, and sanctifier of all life. And may it be so. Amen. Kathy Steffens is going to start out, and then John is going to join her.
So a second good afternoon to everyone. Oh, thank you. Yes, better. So good afternoon to everyone. And on such a beautiful day, I am glad to see you here for at least this amount of time. There are many needs in the world. And our first slide shows us that we would like to focus today on the CSJ response to the crisis of our time. We hear on the news always so many things to be concerned about. And because of some of the committees that I am on, I have a little more, perhaps, information to share with you about what all that we are doing in response. The needs of the time include war, immigration, asylum seeking, justice for the marginalized, for those experiencing homelessness, or seeking and needing education and health care. The crisis of Earth, that crisis to the extent that people and all other creatures may lack shelter, food, and water. Chapter 2019 named how we also promised to respond by promoting peace and nonviolence, and especially supporting women and children. So some of the measures we have taken. We always include those experiencing violence, locally or in the world, in our prayer. Congregationally, we have sent financial support to the Sisters of St. Basil and the needs of the Ukrainian people. We are supporting all of the consociates in Kenya and their broader community. You know that 7 new consociates made their promises last Sunday in Kenya. So other financial help comes from our Partners in Justice Fund. And to be recommended to the Partners in Justice, a sister or consociate needs to be connected to these organizations or to these groups. Grandmother's Circles is supporting scholarships for women in Kenya. And Growing Community Roots presently is providing bathrooms and washing stations. Both of these ministries have been begun by consociates in St. Paul. Annunciation House for Migrants is in El Paso, Texas, ministering to those who get across the border and have no support at that time until they move on to friends or relatives. Border Compassion is a new ministry for those forced to wait in Mexico for asylum applications. So some sisters and others are crossing the border to minister to those who are staying in Mexico. Breaking Free is a Minneapolis emergency shelter, and we are supporting them through Partners in Justice. Hope Community, the Bridge for Youth, and Reclaim all support people marginalized by our society. The Lift Garage was begun to help people who absolutely need their cars for getting to work or school transportation, and yet are poor enough to not be able to actually pay for the needs of their car. So the Lift Garage began by fixing cars at cost. Interfaith Coalition on Immigration is an agency in St. Paul that supports undocumented people through both personal help and legal action. The Eastside Learning Center in St. Paul is asking us now to help them buy culturally appropriate books for people who speak a different language or whose skin color is not what you usually find in books. St. Joseph's School of Music receives money for scholarships for those in need to have music lessons. Sounds like the bread and roses idea. You don't just put food on the table, you help them live a bountiful life. And the Women's Environmental Institute is working in some rural areas now, and we are supporting them. And the Minnesota Peacebuilding Leadership Institute we are supporting training for facilitators of peacemaking. And always, we support women, children, and families in general, especially immigrants, migrants, asylum seekers, and those seeking education and health care through St. Catherine University, now enrolling over 50% women of color. Learning in Style School for adult immigrant learners, offering childcare for their children so that the adults can come to school. Wisdom Ways Center for Spirituality, supporting spiritual seekers of all faiths and nationalities. The St. Joseph Worker Program provides young women experiential opportunities so they can work in areas of justice, as well as living the give and take of community. And St. Mary's Health Clinics providing free health care for those who are uninsured. And Sarah's, an Oasis for Women, which we feature today with more information. So I invite John to present something informational on Sarah's.
Good afternoon. I'm not much for standing in one space, so I'll move around a little bit. As I talk about Sarah's today, if you have questions, please raise your hand and let me know. I would love to have a conversation about this and not just a presentation. My question for you, how many of you have traveled abroad? Excellent. How many of you have lived abroad? Okay, a couple. What I'd like us to do for a moment is to live as a woman at Sarah's coming to America might have experienced. So let's move. Let's pack up and move to Tanzania. We need to do this in a hurry. We're being persecuted. We have to leave behind perhaps family and everything we know. Let's do it now. So my question to you, how many speak the native language of Tanzania? Nobody speaks Swahili. This could be a problem. Where shall we live? How do we become citizens? Where do we go for help? We take a lot of things for granted in the United States. And if you are thinking as a woman of Sarah's and an asylum seeker moving to a new country, if you don't have a native language, you don't have access to housing, you can't access government programs right off the bat, where does that put you? It's in a tough spot. And we have to keep in mind we are seeking asylum because we're being persecuted. So we are not just packing up and going someplace quick for a vacation or because of a job change. We need to run. And perhaps I'm being a little dramatic here, but I'm making the case on what they might be facing. And over the past year plus, we've had some people who have expressed comparisons with Project Home. And why can the women of Sarah's not move out as quickly as the residents at Project Home? And for those of you that might remember a different presentation, Project Home is averaging about 84 days for the residents to move out and into permanent housing. It's not quite the same. You have people in the St. Paul metro area that are familiar with the Twin Cities, and they already speak the native language. They already have access, they are US citizens, to government programs. They might not have family and resources outside of that in the area. And so when we look at this, it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison. When we look at the numbers for Sarah's, right now, we have 23 women that are being educated, furthering their citizenship, working, and seeking opportunities in the United States. The average stay, and we do keep track of this, is about 4 years from the time they enter to the time they leave. With COVID, we've had a little bit more of a delay for some of them and the access to government programs. But keep in mind, since 1996, we've had 600 women that have gone through that program and moved into permanent, sustainable housing and job placement and have moved up in the United States. We've had some residents that have gone much longer than 4 years. The longest resident is 11 years as of this month. And they are moving out this month. 11 years. And to any of you who have gone through life-changing experiences, it takes time. Here are some of the barriers that our residents at Sarah's are facing. So again, they're not fluent in English. They have to learn the language. And that is the beginning of the problem. Many of them have trauma, mental illness. She has a brain injury. Without work history and access to programs, how do you move up? How do you get a better education? How do you get a better job? I have a 17-year-old son. We are now looking at college. He has lots of resources available to him as a U.S. citizen. He's got a father who will help pay for this, perhaps. We're still negotiating. He has scholarship opportunities. He has access to government grants and government scholarships and loans. Our resident at Sarah's does not. So she has been paying for a 4-year degree, class by class, with her income. That drastically slows things down. Resident 13, 6 years she's been there, and you're going to see a lot of the same things repeating. She came in as a cancer survivor. She was getting treatment upon entry. She has physical limitations, no driver's license. Again, no work experience as we would consider that in the United States. No credit or housing history. And somebody that has stayed there on the shorter scale, 3 years. She has family back in Ethiopia, but they're stuck. The embassy is not allowing departures. She has a desire to move in with the family if and when they can get to the United States. And that opens up some new opportunities. You now have multiple streams of income for the family to help elevate things. Over the years, Sarah's has changed. And these are some of the program changes that have happened because we've learned how to do things better. And when I reference our longest guest at 11 years, some of these changes are in dealing with somebody who has been there 11 years and what works and what doesn't. Much like Project Home, Sarah's is now taking referrals only to get into Sarah's. So a woman needs to go through Center of Victims of Torture, Advocates for Human Rights, or International Institute of Minnesota. And once they go through that agency, the agency then contacts the director, Cheryl, and we see if it's going to be a good fit. Once upon a time, the doors used to be open, and whoever showed up was able to come in with limitations, but we no longer do that. And it is tailored for non-US citizens. So we're working with a much more difficult population in the needs and services of who come to Sarah's. Yeah. That's correct. The question was about no longer accepting women that do not have some English speaking capabilities. And that is true. Part of that is, again, it is such a barrier with the program to deal with somebody that speaks no level of English and cannot communicate. So at a basic level, we need some language across the board with the residents. They also sign an 18-month resident agreement, and we can extend that to 3 months or 6 months. Part of that is contingent on having goals and a plan to make it out of Sarah's. Much like my children, while I love them and they're always welcome at my house, they need a plan and to get out. Right? It is not carte blanche, free from here on out. That's not helping anybody, right? We don't need people to sit and watch TV and play video games in my house from here on out. We are trying to empower people to go out and make the world a better place. But we also have to be cognizant that we can't put a time frame to say at 18 months, we're done, get out, even while I'd like to do that with my child. There's a give and take. And so we put together reasonable goals. Is it reasonable in the next 3 years to get these goals taken care of? Right? And we also run it by the referral agency to see what their thoughts are. Does this make sense? The biggest barrier to moving out is affordable housing. And that's a common theme we hear through many of our ministries and at Project Home as well, and in the paper and the news. If you're coming to Sarah's, you don't have 2 income streams. Right? You don't have the education that many of us have or access to it. Again, coming from a different country, your work experience does not necessarily transfer over. And that prevents you from getting a well-paid job. And I'll talk about that a little in the next slide. And don't forget, you still don't have access to a lot of the government programs because you're not a US citizen. So I was talking with Cheryl about this, and the question is affordable housing, and what does that mean? I would venture to say most of you have heard of the $15 an hour minimum wage that we are trying to have in place across the country. At $15 an hour, you're making about $31,000 a year. My wife and I teach financial planning for couples through our church. And the rule of thumb we have generally used as an industry standard is 25% of your take-home pay to be used for housing and no more. And the reason is crises happen and you need to put food on the table and fill up your car at $4.50 a gallon now, and it eats away at your monthly budget. So if you're making $15 an hour, $650 a month is what you can afford in rent. Now, for those of you that have put your budgets together in the last month, I would ask you to reflect on what you have spent on rent. The average rent for an apartment in Minneapolis, St. Paul is $1,621 a month right now. If you run the numbers out at 25%, that's over $100,000 a year in income to afford that. That is why you have two parents working full-time jobs to make ends meet. Here are the ranges of rent in Minneapolis and St. Paul right now. $650 is the bottom of the barrel. So when we look at residents of Sarah's project home, learning in style, the barriers are, how do we find affordable housing to provide a safe place to lay your head at night? Because without security, you're bouncing all over the place. And so one of the questions we ask, how can we get these gals to move out and up faster? Again, goes back to the employment. And how do we move them up in employment and get them into jobs that can pay well enough that you can afford a place on your own? And it is not an easy answer, especially when you don't have access to government programs and the government subsidies for housing. So that's part of why it takes so long to get these women successfully out of the program. And so I've got some questions for the group and for the community. And I would love to have a discussion. We are entering in a time where things are transitioning to bold moves and what that might be. And these are conversations we should be having with all of our ministries. Are they still meeting the times? Should we be doing more? Should we pivot to something different? It's your group. So with that, I'll open it up to discussion and questions if you have any. Sure, the questions. And these are what came to my mind. How do you feel this program is going? Specifically, we're talking about Sarah's today. What areas might we improve? And finally, what excites you about the program? Because frankly, if this doesn't excite the community anymore to help asylum-seeking women, then a larger question needs to be asked.
John, this is Joan Groshen. What occurs to me is, how many women do we have in Sarah's today? And then and you already told us that each day they don't know if they're going to stay for what period of time. So we don't have any idea how fast they're moving through our building. Thank you.
Sure. So to answer the first question, we have space for about 32 residents to stay at Sarah's. 32. With COVID, we took 2 rooms out of circulation to make them quarantine room, if you will, because again, we have 30 women living in community and sharing bathrooms and kitchens. So right now we are running about 25 23, 25. And we are starting to open things up and take more in because we have space available. With the problems we had with COVID, we put a cap on about the last 12, 16 months from bringing others in because it was such a change in the community at Sarah's. But yes, we have roughly 30, 32 rooms available. And to your other question, Joan, it is extremely tough to have a set timeline to say, we need you to obtain citizenship by X date, right? Last week, my daughter turned 15 and started driving. So we had to go to downtown St. Paul to have her take her permit test, the knowledge test. That's only open Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, 8 to 4. So had to leave, go drive to St. Paul, stand in line, get told, actually, this isn't the right spot. You have to go down 2 flights, down the hall, 14 more doors, and then there's a room down there, go in there. Went in there, she took the test, thankfully passed. Great, well done. You have to go back upstairs now, stand back in line. Then they'll get you registered for the next one. So we did that. And they said, it's going to be at least an hour wait before we're ready to handle the permit side of things and get you registered. It's now 4:10. The place closes. So we drove then to Hastings, the government center, because that was the next one available, stood in line, went through the whole process. But she needed a bank statement, a utility statement, Social Security card, and a birth certificate to get her permit to start driving. And she had a mom and dad helping her through the process. So without access to these documents in the process, you're just up a creek, right? I think of how much I struggled just driving to Minneapolis some days because I don't know where to turn. Right? And so that's just a glimmer of it, that it's tough to say, especially with the government bureaucracy, we can guarantee we're going to have this done by X date, especially with COVID coming in, because they have changed the process and everything's virtual now, set things up that way. So it's a struggle, but that's part of the planning process to say, what are your goals? Is it realistic to say, we're going to start educating and learning this in the next year? Maybe, maybe not.
John, this is Kevin. This was an excellent presentation, but is this what Bold Moves is doing with all of our ministries that we're going to hear about later? This was excellent, but will they be doing all of this?
I can't speak to that personally because I'm not on that
Okay.
section.
Okay.
It is my understanding that yes, Bold Moves is looking at all of these ministries and asking these questions. And I would hope that is what they're doing, because again, are we meeting the needs of the time, right? How do we set these ministries up to be successful moving forward?
And yes, we'd like to do that with the other ministries, not only the ones that are going into Bold Moves, but all the ministries.
Kind of 2 parts to this question. Does staff spend time with individual residents, and/or are there English classes available?
The first part, do staff spend time with the residents? Yes. Cheryl meets with each resident once a month. And what has worked well, especially since COVID, is to have the meetings virtually. Most of these residents, again, are not sitting there 24 hours a day waiting for something to happen. They are out learning and working and volunteering. So she can meet with them at 7 o'clock at night or on a weekend or whatever works for their schedule. But yes, she checks in regularly with each one of them to see how their goals are progressing and things are going. And we also have an on-site house manager that handles the day-to-day pieces of just keeping things in order and the food coming in from Second Harvest and the fire system isn't working and these two residents are having a quarrel. It happens, right? So we've got staff that are on site. You would generally say normal working hours, but we also have staff that are checking in outside of those hours too. And your second question was?
Can I just add to that, that Cheryl is on call for any emergency, and they do have night staff.
Yeah, we have full, night staff that are there 24 hours a day. It's full staff.
Did you have a second question?
John, there are rumors going around, is it fact or fiction, that Sarah's house is full of asbestos and a lot of bugs, and the women refuse to do their work?
It is fact that it has a lot of asbestos in that building. The building, much like Bethany, was built 64, I believe it was, somewhere right around there. And they built everything with asbestos. So it is not out in the open, but in the walls, we've got pipe insulation and tiling and whatnot that does have asbestos in there. To answer your other questions, was it on bugs?
Yes.
We have a pest control company that comes at least once a month to deal with bugs. And it has not been a problem. I mean, years ago, we had a problem where one of the residents moved in and had bed bugs, and that was a problem. But since then, no, it has been under control, and it's no different than any other house. This morning, I woke up and had box elder bugs in my back hall. It's a house, it's a home. You got people coming and going, doors open, windows open, you get bugs in there, but it is not a rodent infested place by any stretch of the imagination. And the women do have different jobs and tasks that they're asked to do. And the house manager and Cheryl work to coordinate that and see what is feasible for them to actually do and to hold them accountable. But much like the rest of us, some are good, some are not so good. And I think of my own kids, and some days I can't get them to take out the garbage. And some days I don't take out the garbage myself. So it's a work in progress. And that is part of learning how to live in community, as I'm sure you all are aware of. What can you do? What don't you want to do, but you're going to do? And what things aren't that big of a deal when all is said and done. Does that help?
I just want to comment on one, first of all, that the asbestos was removed in a proper way in, I think it was in the 1980s when I was working there, and we were installing our own heating system separating from what had been Durham High School. So that took a long time. We were, the entire basement was stripped of its asphalt. As far as the flooring goes, most of it's, I don't know if they took the tile out and when they put down the carpeting, but that was asphalt tile. And, but I wanted to ask the question on this. Is there sufficient help for Cheryl and any staff members when there is friction between residents. And I have been aware of it when I was with some of the residents a couple of years ago. You know, you have a lot of different countries there and they are not naturally friendly necessarily back in Africa. So is there enough professional help for them to kind of what do you call it? What we have if there's a disagreement, to work through that on a level that would be appropriate for people who come from a very different society?
That's a great question. It seems to be working. And Cheryl has gone out, and the staff as well, undertaken additional training on how to deal with the conflict between people. And while I wouldn't say it doesn't happen regularly, it does happen. And there have been women who have been removed from the program over the years, and that would be the exception. But yes, they are undergoing, I think it's called STAR training, which helps to look at the differences and how do we mitigate that and get along and deal with the residents. At this time, I would say I think they're comfortable where the staffing levels are and the resources they have to deal with the residents and their differences. But that is something that is constantly being looked at and adjusted.
Maybe this is where I could just add one more piece about that was one of the changes that happened, that every single one of these women has the support of an agency outside of Sarah's, so that the counseling from Centers for Victims of Torture or from the International Institute can spin over to, you can ask that woman, you can require to have that woman speak with her counselor, and that person might even come to the house to help, you know, mitigate something. And there's one other piece that didn't fit into your program, and also that no one has asked about yet, but I've heard it, you know, like the women do pay rent. And I think that surprised people, because what you're trying to do is build up how much rent they pay according to how much they're making. So it is a learning experience, and it's difficult to think that you've got the same, nothing has changed, but now you're paying more rent. But it does help them prepare to move out so that they're closer to the rent that will be required when they leave.
In regard to paying rent, you told us how much an apartment would cost, and it appears that a person making $15 an hour, which is kind of common for the jobs they might get, would not have enough money to pay for an apartment. Are they encouraged to get a roommate, or are they helped to find a suitable roommate for when they move out to help them with the rent?
That option is always there. I would imagine that's a difficult piece to find a roommate that will partner up well, if you will. Again, you're coming from a traumatic background, limited English. How do you find that person that's a good fit? And I think ideally, yes, it would be great to partner up and have a roommate, and that's part of when the family, if and when they can come over, why that helps, because now you do have multiple people that can work and help support this. The one resident in particular, she was able to find a roommate that hopefully it will work out with. But you do run the risk that things aren't going to work out. And now what do you do? If you're not prepared really to stand on your own, chances of failure then are going to be greatly increased.
John, this is Carolyn. A question that I have that I think it's important to ask. Are there other agencies and organizations that are offering comparable services to asylum-seeking women?
That's a very good question, and that is part of what Bold Moves is looking at. And part of what, as an organization, we need to be looking at across the board for all of these ministries. Where Sarah's is unique is the non-US citizen asylum seeking individual. So we've got, and that's part of why we no longer have it just open to, Nancy over here was abused by her husband and needs a place and can move in. Well, she has access to other resources and programs and agencies. So that's not a great fit for the people, the group coming into Sarah's. I am not certain of what exists in the Twin Cities area that fits the bill like Sarah's does at this time. And that's not to say they don't exist or a portion of them doesn't exist, but I think part of what works for Sarah's and the women is not having a cap on the program and allowing them to grow at their rate that they can. But yes, we absolutely should be looking at, is there somebody else that can do this better than what we are doing? We don't need to duplicate services, and we shouldn't. They don't. The women cook for themselves. The women cook for themselves. So Second Harvest Food brings in, I don't know, pallets full of food. A lot of it's donated. You purchase some food, but the residents have their own. A couple of years ago, we bought different refrigerators. That was actually in the capital budget that year. Different refrigerators, commercial refrigerators. So each resident has their own bin on the shelf of their food, and then common community kitchen, and they cook their own breakfast, lunch, and dinners at their own schedule. And it seems to work. It smells good most days too. The sisters provide that. So the kitchen is fully stocked, pots, pans, silverware, utensils. And if something breaks, it gets replaced. But yeah, we provide the kitchen equipment, the stoves and microwaves and all of that for them to use. And then as the women are transitioning out, that does become a point where, do we have pieces that we can send with them, right? So as we have stuff coming out of Carondelet Village, are there residents there that could use a coffee maker, a microwave, the linens, etc.? So we try to funnel some of that way too, if it is a good fit and they need it. Well, I didn't put you all to sleep, so thank you for staying awake.
Thank you, John. That was very interesting. Thank you very much.
I hope you all can get out and enjoy the beautiful weather. And my children, since it's May 4th, would say, may the 4th be with you, which is a Star Wars reference. But thank you all.
Thank you so much. We'd like to do this again with other ministries. Hopefully we'll be able to do another one next month. Is there any burning question that anybody has about anything before we're done today? All right. Thank you very much for taking the time and enjoy the rest of the day. This has all been recorded, so we'll send the link out and you can listen to it. It'll be on Rapid Relay, and the link will be on Rapid Relay so you can listen to it or watch it and listen.